My name is Amari Carter. I am 32 years old, a staff sergeant in the United States Army. I have faced blinding sandstorms in the Middle East and live fire exercises where the ground shook beneath my boots. But I never imagined the most brutal battlefield of my life would be a dining room table on Christmas Eve. That night, my mother-in-law, Judith, slammed her heavy silver fork down onto the table, pointed a manicured finger directly in my face in front of 12 guests, and hissed, "You are completely useless, Amari. How can a woman who only knows how to hold a gun possibly know how to keep a husband?" I turned to Tyler, my husband, looking for defense, looking for a partner. But he just casually sipped his expensive red wine, didn't even look at me, and issued an order. "You heard what Mother said. If you can't act like a normal woman, then leave. Don't come back until you know how to apologize to her." They thought I would cry, or beg, like I had so many times before. But they forgot who I am. In the military, when we are ambushed, we don't run away. We execute a tactical retreat to reload and counterattack. And that is exactly what I did. They think I'm weak, but they are about to learn a lesson they will never forget. If you are ready to watch me demand justice and make them pay the price, type karma in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe because my counterattack starts right now. The kitchen was a war zone, but not the kind I was trained for. There was no shrapnel, no enemy fire, just the suffocating heat of a double oven and the overwhelming scent of cinnamon and nutmeg. I wiped a bead of sweat from my forehead with the back of my wrist, careful not to get flour on my forehead. My hands, usually steady when assembling an M4 carbine in the dark, were trembling slightly as I wove the lattice crust over the apple pie. I had been up since 0500 hours, peeling 5 pounds of Granny Smith apples by hand, making the dough from scratch, trying to create something perfect, something undeniable. "You're making a mess, Amari." The voice cut through the warmth of the kitchen like a blade of ice. Judith, my mother-in-law, stood in the doorway. She looked immaculate in a silk blouse that probably cost more than my monthly base pay. She wasn't cooking. She never cooked. On the counter behind her sat piles of gourmet boxes from a high-end catering company in D.C. Honey-glazed ham, scalloped potatoes, green beans almondine, all ready to be plated on her bone china and passed off as hospitality. "I'll clean it up, Judith," I said, my voice tight. "I just wanted to make Tyler's favorite, homemade." She wrinkled her nose, looking at my hands. My knuckles were rough, the skin calloused from years of drills, ropes, and cold steel. They weren't the soft, lotion-soaked hands of the women in her Northern Virginia circle. "Just make sure you're showered before the guests arrive," she sniffed, turning on her heel. "You smell like labor." 2 hours later, I was sitting at the long mahogany dining table, trapped in a green velvet dress that Tyler had insisted I wear. It was beautiful, I suppose, but it felt like a straitjacket. I felt exposed without my uniform, without the armor that told the world who I was. Around me, the air was thick with the clinking of crystal glasses and the polite, hollow laughter of 12 strangers, friends of Judith, people from the country club, people who had never worried about a deployment schedule in their lives. They ate the catered ham. They drank the spiked eggnog. And then, Judith brought out the pie. My pie. It sat in the center of the table, golden brown and bubbling perfectly. A small spark of pride lit up in my chest. Maybe, I thought, maybe this is the peace offering that works. Judith sliced a piece, the silver server clinking against the plate. She took a small theatrical bite. The table went silent, waiting for the verdict. She chewed slowly, her face twisting into a grimace of distaste. She reached for her water glass, taking a frantic sip as if she needed to wash away something foul. "Oh dear," she sighed, loud enough for the neighbors to hear. "It's so dry." My heart hammered against my ribs. "I used the recipe Tyler likes," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Well, it reflects its maker, doesn't it?" Judith smiled, a cold, shark-like expression. "Dry, hard, lacking sweetness." She turned to the woman on her right. You know, Tyler's cousin just married that lovely girl, Emily, a preschool teacher. Now that is a woman with a nurturing spirit. Her baking simply melts in your mouth. The guest chuckled politely. I gripped my napkin under the table so hard my knuckles turned white. I am a staff sergeant in the United States Army, Judith, I said, the words slipping out before I could stop them. I nurture the safety of this country. The room went dead silent. The air pressure dropped. I had broken the cardinal rule of the Carter household. Do not talk back to the Queen. Judith slowly set her fork down. The metal hit the wood with a violence that made the candle flames flicker. She looked at me with pure, unadulterated loathing. You are completely useless, Amari, she hissed. Look at you. You sit there with your rough hands and your aggressive tone. The army might have taught you to kill, but they certainly didn't teach you how to be a woman, did they? How do you expect to keep a husband when you can't even provide a decent dessert? I felt the blood rush to my face, a mix of humiliation and rage that tasted like copper in my mouth. I turned to the man next to me. My husband. The man I had supported while he found himself between jobs. The man whose student loans were being paid off by my hazard pay. Tyler, I said, my voice trembling. Are you going to let her speak to me like that? Tyler swirled his glass of Merlot. He stared into the red liquid, refusing to meet my eyes. He looked small, pathetic. A 34-year-old boy afraid of his mother's shadow. You heard what Mother said, Amari, he said, his voice flat, bored. He waved his hand toward the front door, a dismissive gesture you would use for a stray dog. You've ruined the mood. If you can't act like a normal woman, then leave. Get out. Tyler. I said get out, he snapped, finally looking at me with eyes full of annoyance. Don't come back until you know how to apologize to her. I stood up. The chair scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. 12 pairs of eyes watched me. They expected tears. They expected a scene. I didn't give them one. I straightened my spine. I took a breath. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. Tactical breathing. I walked out of the dining room, past the glistening Christmas tree, past the stockings that didn't have my name on them. I walked into the hallway and grabbed the only thing on the coat rack that felt like mine, my old, faded camo field jacket. I didn't put on my heels. I carried them. I opened the heavy oak front door and stepped out. The Virginia winter hit me instantly. It was 10 degrees below zero, the wind biting and cruel. The snow crunched under my bare feet, numbing my toes within seconds. But the cold outside felt better than the heat of that kitchen. I slammed the door behind me. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the silent, wealthy neighborhood. I was shivering, standing in the snow in a velvet dress and a field jacket with nowhere to go. But as I looked back at the glowing windows of the mansion, I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like a soldier who had just identified the enemy. The retreat had begun. But the war was far from over. The engine of my Ford truck groaned as I turned the key, a reluctant sound that matched the heaviness in my chest. I didn't drive away immediately. I couldn't. My hands were shaking too badly to grip the steering wheel. And it wasn't just from the Virginia frost that was already creeping across the windshield. I cranked the heat up to the max, blasting hot air against my frozen toes. But the chill I felt went deeper than my skin. It was in my bones. It was in my soul. Sitting there in the dark driveway, watching the warm, golden glow of Judith's mansion through my rearview mirror, I didn't see a home. I saw a cage. And for the first time in 5 years, I asked myself the question that had been lurking in the back of my mind like a shadow. How did I let it get this bad? I wasn't always this woman, this silent, velvet-wearing doll who trembled at a dinner table. My mind drifted back, 5 years ago. It was the first time I met Judith. I had driven straight to her house from Fort Belvoir. I was still in my OCPs, my operational camouflage pattern uniform, smelling like CLP gun oil and exhaustion after a 12-hour shift. I thought they would be proud. Tyler had told me his mother was a patriot. She even had a Blue Star family sticker on the back of her pristine white Lexus SUV, a symbol that she had a family member serving in the military. I walked up the driveway, my combat boots crunching on the gravel, feeling strong, feeling worthy. Judith opened the door before I could knock. She didn't look at my face. She looked straight at my feet. Her nose wrinkled as if she had smelled rotting garbage. "Oh," she said, her voice dripping with polite disdain. "Tyler didn't tell me you were coming. In costume." "It's my uniform, ma'am," I said, smiling, trying to be respectful. "Well, it's filthy," she countered, blocking the doorway with her body. "I just had the white oak floors refinished. You simply cannot wear those clodhoppers inside my house. They look like they've been dragged through a sewer." "They're standard-issue combat boots, Judith," I tried to explain. "They're clean." "Garage." She pointed a manicured finger toward the side door. "Take them off in the garage and leave them there. I won't have that aggressive military aesthetic clashing with my foyer." I looked at Tyler, waiting for him to defend me, to tell her that these boots had marched miles to keep people like her safe. But he just shrugged, looking embarrassed. "Just do what she says, babe. It's easier." So, I did. I sat on the cold concrete floor of her garage and unlaced my boots, leaving the symbols of my service next to her recycling bin. I walked into her house in my socks, feeling smaller with every step. That was the first chip in my armor. The second memory hit me as I rubbed my arms, feeling the velvet fabric of the dress that Tyler picked out. It was 2 years ago. I was in our apartment, getting ready to go to the gym. I was wearing a tank top, feeling good about my progress. I had just maxed out my deadlift score. I felt powerful. Tyler walked in, drinking a protein shake, and stopped. He frowned, looking at my arms. "Babe," he said, not with admiration, but with concern. "You're going kind of hard on the weights, aren't you?" "I need to stay in shape for the PT test, Ty," I said, flexing slightly in the mirror. He came up behind me, but he didn't hug me. He pinched the muscle of my bicep, a pinch that hurt just a little too much. "Yeah, but look at you. You're getting bulky. Your shoulders are broader than mine." "So?" I laughed, thinking he was joking. "So, it's not feminine, Amari," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper, like he was sharing a shameful secret. "Mom mentioned it last week. She said you look like a lumberjack. She's afraid of you. She thinks you look aggressive. Maybe stick to cardio, Pilates, something that makes you look more like a wife and less like a bodyguard." I stopped wearing tank tops that week. I started wearing cardigans, long sleeves, anything to hide the strength that I had worked so hard to build. I shrank myself to make him feel big. But the memory that hurt the most, the one that made hot tears finally spill over my frozen cheeks, was the memory of the medals. We had just moved into a townhouse near the base, a place Tyler insisted we rent because it was closer to Mom, even though the rent ate up nearly all of my basic allowance for housing, BAH. I was unpacking my most prized possessions, my Army commendation medals, my achievement medals, the ribbons I had earned through blood, sweat, and sand in the Middle East. I was arranging them on the mantle, a small corner of pride in a house that didn't feel like mine. Judith came over for an inspection. She walked into the living room, saw the medals, and sighed. A long, weary sigh. "Oh, Tyler," she called out. "I thought we discussed the aesthetic." She walked over to the mantle and started sweeping my medals into her hand like they were dust bunnies. "What are you doing?" I asked, rushing over. "These are just too much," Judith said, dropping my medals, my life's work, into an old, beat-up shoebox she found on the floor. Clink, clink, clink. The sound of metal hitting cardboard sounded like trash being thrown away. "They don't match the beige theme, Amari," she said dismissively, closing the lid. "They're so violent, so tacky. Let's put these in the closet. We want guests to feel relaxed, not like they're in a bunker." I looked at the closed box. I looked at the empty mantle, and I said nothing. Sitting in my truck now, 5 years later, the realization hit me with the force of an IED explosion. They didn't just hate my cooking. They didn't just hate my boots. They hated me. They hated the soldier because the soldier was strong, and they needed me to be weak. They needed a servant, a paycheck, a prop for their family photos, not a warrior. I looked down at my feet. My toes were numb, squeezed into the ridiculous heels I had thrown on the passenger seat. For 5 years, I'd been trying to shove a soldier's foot into Cinderella's glass slipper. I had filed down my calluses, hidden my scars, and lowered my voice, hoping that if I just changed enough, the shoe would fit. Hoping that if the shoe fit, the prince and the queen would finally love me. But the glass slipper didn't fit. It never would. Because I wasn't a princess. And looking back at that house, I realized Tyler was never a prince. He was just the jester holding his mother's purse. I wiped my face. The tears were cold, but the fire in my gut was starting to burn hot. "No more," I whispered to the empty car. "No more hiding. I know I'm not the only one. I know there are thousands of you out there who have dimmed your own light just to keep the peace in a house that never appreciated you. If you have ever felt like you had to change who you are just to be loved by the wrong people, please do this for me. Hit that like button right now. And in the comments, I want you to type 2 words. Not anymore. Let me know I'm not driving down this dark road alone tonight." I shifted the truck into drive. The tires spun for a second on the ice, then caught traction. I didn't look back at the mansion. I turned toward the highway, toward the cheap motel lights in the distance. It was time to take off the glass slipper and lace up my boots again. The neon sign of the Motel 6 flickered with a rhythmic, buzzing hum, casting a sickly blue light across the hood of my truck. I was parked just off Interstate 95, that long concrete artery that bleeds through the heart of Virginia. The sound of 18-wheelers thundering past was constant, a low, mechanical roar that shook the thin glass of the motel window. I paid $49 for the room. The night clerk, a guy with heavy eyelids and a stain on his polo shirt, didn't ask why a woman in a velvet evening gown and a camo field jacket was checking in alone at midnight on Christmas Eve. He just slid the keycard across the counter and went back to watching a game show on a small TV. Room 114 smelled like stale cigarette smoke masked by cheap lemon cleaner. The carpet was a shade of industrial brown that was designed to hide stains, and the bedspread was thin and rough to the touch. I sat on the edge of the mattress, still wearing my jacket. I was shivering, but not from the cold anymore. It was the adrenaline crash, the shock wearing off, leaving behind a hollow, aching void in my chest. I looked around the dingy room and let out a dry, humorless laugh. I had slept in shipping containers in the middle of the Iraqi desert. I had slept in holes dug into the sand while sandstorms howled like banshees overhead. I had slept in barracks where the air conditioning broke when it was 120 degrees outside. But in those places, as miserable as they were, I was never truly alone. I closed my eyes and could almost hear the sounds of my platoon. The sound of Rodriguez cracking a joke about the terrible MREs. The sound of Miller cleaning his weapon. The feeling of knowing that if I closed my eyes, someone else was on watch. Someone had my 6. In the sandbox, we were miserable together. We were a unit. Here, in this civilized world, just 20 miles away from a $1 million mansion filled with people who were supposed to be my family, I was completely isolated. I was a ghost. My phone buzzed in my pocket, startling me. The vibration felt like a taser against my thigh. I pulled it out, my heart doing a traitorous little flip in my chest. A part of me, the part that had spent 5 years trying to be the perfect wife, hoped it was Tyler. I hoped he had woken up from his stupor. I hoped he was calling to say he was sorry, that he was coming to get me, that he loved me more than his mother's approval. The screen lit up the dark room. It was a text from Tyler. I stared at the words, reading them over and over again, trying to find a hidden meaning, trying to find the apology. "Are you pulling a stunt? Seriously, Amari? Get back here before the neighbors notice your truck is gone. You're making me look like an idiot. Mom is furious." I read it a 4th time. Not. "Are you safe?" Not. "Are you cold?" Not. "I'm sorry. Just neighbors. Appearance." "Mom." Something inside me snapped. It wasn't a loud snap, like a bone breaking. It was quiet, like a thread finally giving way under too much tension. For years, I had told myself that Tyler was just caught in the middle. I told myself he was a victim of his mother's overbearing personality, just like I was. I made excuses for him. He's stressed, he's trying, he loves me, he just doesn't know how to show it when she's around. But looking at that text message, illuminated by the harsh blue light of the motel sign outside, the excuse crumbled. He wasn't a victim, he was an accomplice. In the Army, we live by the warrior ethos. One line is burned into our brains from the first day of basic training: I will never leave a fallen comrade. It doesn't matter if you're under fire, it doesn't matter if you're tired, you do not leave your people behind. You drag them out. You carry them. You die for them if you have to. Tyler hadn't just left a fallen comrade. He had pushed me down and walked away because he was afraid the neighbors might see him helping me up. I felt a tear slide down my cheek, hot and angry. I wiped it away furiously. Discipline equals freedom. The voice in my head belonged to Jocko Willink, a retired Navy SEAL commander whose podcast I listened to during my long commutes to the base. He talked about detachment, about stepping back from the chaos of emotions to see the tactical reality of a situation. Detach, I told myself. Look at the battlefield, Sergeant Carter. I looked at the phone again. That device was my tether to them. It was the leash Tyler used to jerk me back into line. He expected a reply. He expected me to type out a frantic apology, to say I was just blowing off steam, to ask if I could come home if I parked around the back. He expected the Amari who needed his validation to survive. But that Amari was freezing to death in a velvet dress. I remembered another thing Jocko said. There is no growth in the comfort zone. Judith's house, with its radiant floor heating and catered food, was supposed to be a comfort zone. But it wasn't. It was a kill zone for my self-respect. This motel room, this dirty, cold, lonely box on the side of I-95, this was the discomfort zone. This was where the pain was. And if the doctrine was right, this was where I was going to grow. My thumb hovered over the reply button. My old instinct screamed at me to fix it. Don't make him matter. Just go back. It's easier. But then I looked at my hand holding the phone. The scar on my thumb from a knife slip during survival training. The calluses on my palms. These were hands trained for war. Why was I using them to beg for scraps of affection from a coward? No copy, I whispered to the empty room. I didn't type a response. I didn't try to explain myself. Explanation is a sign of weakness when you're dealing with a tyrant. Instead, I pressed the power button on the side of the phone. The screen asked, "Slide to power off." I slid my thumb across the glass. The light died. The screen went black. The connection to Tyler, to Judith, to the guilt, to the manipulation. It was severed. The silence in the room changed. It wasn't the silence of loneliness anymore. It was the silence of a radio blackout. Tactical silence. I placed the dead phone on the nightstand next to a plastic-wrapped cup. I laid back on the lumpy pillows, pulling the thin polyester blanket up to my chin. I was still cold. I was still heartbroken. My bank account was shared with a man who viewed me as a liability, and I had no idea where I would live next week. But as I stared up at the water-stained ceiling, listening to the relentless rhythm of the highway traffic outside, I realized something. I wasn't waiting for orders anymore. I was in command. The tactical retreat was underway. Now, I just had to survive the night so I could plan the counteroffensive at dawn. The Waffle House off Route 1 was a sanctuary of grease, coffee, and unpretentious noise. It was the complete opposite of Judith's sterile, silent mansion. Here, the air smelled like sizzling bacon and maple syrup, and the waitresses called you honey without a trace of irony. I sat in a red vinyl booth, staring down at a plate of the All-Star special that Brooke had ordered for me: scrambled eggs, hash browns scattered and smothered, toast, and a waffle. It was comfort food, the kind of meal designed to heal a hangover or a broken heart. Brooke sat across from me, her hands wrapped around a thick ceramic mug. She was a civilian, a nurse I had met at a CrossFit gym 2 years ago. She was the only person in my life who saw the cracks in my marriage before I did. "You look like hell, Amari," Brooke said softly, pushing a packet of jelly toward my toast. "I feel like hell," I admitted, my voice raspy. I slept at the Motel 6 off I-95. I turned my phone off. I think I walked out on my marriage last night. Brooke didn't look surprised. She didn't offer the usual platitudes about working things out or counseling. Instead, she looked relieved. And then, she looked guilty. Amari, she said, her voice dropping to a serious whisper that cut through the clatter of silverware around us. There's something I need to tell you, something I should have told you months ago, but I didn't want to be the one to blow up your life. I looked up, my fork pausing halfway to my mouth. What are you talking about? Brooke took a deep breath. Do you remember the 4th of July BBQ at Judith's house last summer? The one where I brought my nephew? I nodded. It had been a sweltering Virginia day. I had spent the entire time manning the grill while Tyler and his mother drank cocktails on the screened-in porch. I went inside to put my nephew down for a nap in the guest room, Brooke continued. I left the baby monitor on the porch table so I could hear him if he woke up while I was grabbing a drink in the kitchen. But I didn't hear the baby. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Her grip was tight, urgent. The monitor picked up a conversation on the porch between Tyler and Judith. They didn't know I was listening in the kitchen. My stomach turned. What did they say? Brooke looked pained. Judith was complaining about you, the usual stuff, your clothes, your laugh, how you didn't fit in with their image. She asked Tyler why he hadn't left you yet. She asked him why he was wasting his time with a grunt. I felt the blood drain from my face. And? What did Tyler say? Brooke hesitated, her eyes filling with sympathy. He laughed, Amari. He actually laughed. And then he said... She pulled out a small notebook from her purse, flipping to a page where she had scribbled something down. I wrote it down because I couldn't believe it. He said, Mom, I know she's rough around the edges. I know she's embarrassing. But you have to look at the numbers. Her BAH pays off my Ford Raptor. Her paycheck covers the credit card bills. If I leave her now, I lose that housing allowance. I'm stuck with her until the truck is paid off. The world seemed to stop. The noise of the diner, the sizzling grill, the laughter of the truckers at the counter, faded into a dull roar. Stuck with her. B. Basic allowance for housing. It was a tax-free monthly allowance given to service members to pay for off-base housing. In Northern Virginia, that allowance was substantial, over $2,000 a month. I thought about Tyler's Ford Raptor, that massive $60,000 truck he insisted he needed for his commute to an office job. I'd been paying the note on it for 3 years. I thought I was being a supportive partner, helping us build a life. I wasn't a partner. I was a financing plan. He said he was stuck with me, I whispered, the words tasting like ash. He called you a cash cow, Amari, Brooke said, her voice shaking with anger. He isn't weak. He isn't a mama's boy who can't stand up for himself. He's a leech. He's using you. I felt a wave of nausea. All the times Tyler had asked to borrow money, all the times he suggested we use my card for dinner because he was short this week, all the times he pushed me to take extra shifts or volunteer for deployments because we need the savings. It wasn't for us. It was for him. I didn't want to believe it, I said, tears welling up again. I thought he just struggled with money. He doesn't struggle with money, Brooke said firmly. He struggles with morality. She pulled out her phone. There's one more thing. After the BBQ, I tracked down Catherine. You know, the crazy ex Tyler always talks about. The one who supposedly cheated on him. Brooke nodded. I called her this morning while you were on your way here. I told her you walked out. She wants to talk to you. Brooke tapped the screen and put the phone on speaker, sliding it toward me on the Formica table. Hello? A woman's voice came through, clear and sharp. Catherine, it's Amari, I said, my voice trembling. Amari, Catherine said. Her tone wasn't hostile. It was full of pity. Did he do it? Did he finally drain you dry? I don't understand, I stammered. Tyler told me you cheated on him, that you broke his heart. Catherine let out a bitter, cynical laugh. Honey, I never cheated. I got laid off from my marketing job. The second, my unemployment check wasn't enough to cover his golf club membership fees. Judith started a rumor that I was seeing someone else. She poisoned the well so Tyler could dump me without looking like the bad guy. Tyler doesn't date women for love. He dates income streams. I sat back against the booth, stunned. The pieces of the puzzle were slamming together with violent force. Judith didn't hate me because I was a soldier. She hated me because I was uncontrollable, yet she tolerated me because I was profitable. And Tyler? Tyler didn't love me. He didn't even like me. He was stuck with me because I was paying for the lifestyle he felt entitled to. This wasn't just a bad marriage. This was fraud. Financial and emotional fraud. He's going to try to get you back, Catherine warned through the phone. He needs that BAH. Don't let him gaslight you. He already tried, I said, thinking of the text message. Get back here before the neighbors notice. Thank you, Catherine, I said softly. Brooke hung up the phone and looked at me. So? Now you know. The question is, Sergeant Carter, what are you going to do about it? I looked down at my hands, the hands that knew how to assemble a weapon in the dark, the hands that had held the hands of dying soldiers, the hands that had baked a pie from scratch for people who saw me as nothing more than an ATM machine. The sadness that had been drowning me since last night began to evaporate. In its place, a cold, hard resolve started to solidify. It was the feeling of switching a safety selector from safe to semi. They think I'm just a dumb grunt, I said, my voice low and steady. They think I'm just a paycheck. I looked up at Brooke, and for the first time in 24 hours, my eyes were dry. They forgot one thing, I said. You don't steal from the U.S. government, and you sure as hell don't steal from a staff sergeant. Brooke smiled, a fierce, predatory grin. That's the spirit. I'm not going back to apologize, I said, reaching for my coffee. I'm going to initiate a hostile takeover. The truth was out. The intelligence had been gathered, the enemy was identified, and they had absolutely no idea what was coming for them. Walking out of the Waffle House, the winter air hit me like a physical slap, but it was nothing compared to what was happening in my pocket. I had turned my phone back on inside the diner to take Catherine's call, and now it was vibrating violently, a continuous, angry buzz against my hip. It wasn't just one or two messages, it was a barrage. I pulled the device out, squinting against the harsh, mid-morning sun. My screen was filled with notifications, missed calls from numbers I didn't recognize, Facebook notifications. But the one that stopped my heart was a text from Sergeant First Class Miller, my platoon sergeant, and a man who didn't deal in rumors. Carter, I'm getting calls. People saying you've gone 10-7, saying you're a danger to yourself. Do I need to get the commander involved, or is this civvy bullshit? Report in. My stomach dropped through the floor. Gone 10-7 was police code for out of service, but in our world, in the rumor mill of the base, it meant something darker. It meant a mental break. What is it? Brooke asked, noticing the color drain from my face as we stood by her car. Miller just texted me, I said, my voice tight. Someone is telling people I'm having a psychotic break. Someone is saying I'm suicidal. Brooke frowned, whipping out her own phone. Let me check the local pages. If this is happening, it started somewhere. She scrolled for a moment, her thumb moving furiously. Then she stopped, her jaw clenched. Oh, that witch, Brooke hissed. That absolute, self-righteous witch. She turned her screen toward me. It was a post from the private Facebook group of the Ladies' Auxiliary of Northern Virginia, Judith's inner circle of church friends and country club wives. The post read, Sisters, please lift up the Carter family in prayer this morning. My poor daughter-in-law, Amari, is suffering from a severe episode. The war has finally caught up to her mind. She's confused, aggressive, and missing. We fear for her safety and ours. Please pray for Tyler as he navigates this tragedy with a veteran who has lost her way. PTSD. Prayer Warriors. I stared at the screen, reading the comments underneath. Oh no, those poor soldiers. They bring the violence home with them. Praying for Tyler. He's such a saint for dealing with that. I heard she threatened them at dinner. So scary. She weaponized the prayer chain, I whispered, a cold fury rising in my chest. In the South, and especially in the high society circles of Virginia, the prayer chain is the most efficient intelligence network in existence. It masquerades as concern, but it is pure, unfiltered gossip. By asking people to pray for my broken mind, Judith wasn't just embarrassing me, she was nuking my career. If the wrong person saw this, if my commander believed I was unstable, I could lose my security clearance. I could be flagged as non-deployable. I could be forced into a psychiatric evaluation that would stay on my permanent record. Judith wasn't just trying to make me look bad to the neighbors. She was trying to strip me of my rank. She knew that the only thing I had left, the only thing she couldn't buy, was my reputation as a soldier. And she was bombing it. Why? I asked, looking at Brooke. Why go this far? Why not just say we had a fight? Think about it, Amari, Brooke said, her voice hard. If you divorce Tyler now, with a clean record, you get half the assets. You walk away with your dignity. But if you're crazy, if you're unstable, then Tyler is the victim. I finished the sentence, the realization dawning on me. He becomes the long-suffering husband caring for his sick wife. He gets the sympathy. He probably gets to keep the house and the truck because Amari isn't in a state to manage finances. It was a tactical strike, a preemptive legal maneuver disguised as a prayer request. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was Tyler. I opened the text, bracing myself. Amari, Mom showed me the messages you're sending people. You're not making sense. Mom is right, honey. You're sick. The war. It did something to you that we didn't see until last night. Come home. I'm not mad. I've already made an emergency appointment for you with Dr. Evans, Mom's psychiatrist. We need to get you on medication before you hurt yourself. Please, let us help you. I read the text twice. It was perfect. Too perfect. It was written for a judge. If I didn't reply, he would show this to a court and say, "Look, Your Honor, I tried to get her help, but she refused." If I replied angrily, he would say, "See? Look how aggressive and irrational she is." He was gaslighting me. He was trying to rewrite reality, trying to make me doubt my own sanity. He wanted me to believe that standing up for myself was a symptom of mental illness. I looked at my reflection in the window of Brooke's car. I didn't see a crazy woman. I saw a woman who had been asleep for 5 years and had finally woken up. I saw a staff sergeant who had managed logistics for a battalion in a combat zone. I saw a woman who could navigate a convoy through a sandstorm. I was not broken. I was not fragile. And I sure as hell wasn't going to let a woman who had never worked a day in her life diagnose me with PTSD just to cover up her son's financial parasitism. He wants me to go to their doctor, I said to Brooke, my voice terrifyingly calm. He wants to drug me into submission. What are you going to do? Brooke asked, looking worried. If you go back there, they'll swarm you. I tightened my grip on the phone until the case creaked. I'm not going back there, I said. And I'm not going to a doctor. I typed a response to Sergeant Miller first. CSG Miller, I am 10-4, acknowledged. I am safe, sober, and sane. I am currently dealing with a hostile domestic situation involving defamation. I will be reporting to JAG immediately to file a statement. Do not believe the chatter. Carter out. Then I looked at Tyler's text again. I didn't reply. I took a screenshot. They want to play the mental health card, I said, looking at Brooke with eyes that were cold and dry. Fine. They forgot that the military has lawyers who eat civilians like Judith for breakfast. You're going to JAG? Brooke asked, a slow smile spreading across her face. I'm going to JAG, I confirmed. This isn't a family dispute anymore, Brooke. They just attacked a U.S. soldier. This is a skirmish. I opened the door to my truck and climbed in. The smell of stale smoke from the motel was still on my clothes, but I didn't care. I felt sharper than I had in years. Judith wants a war, I muttered as I slammed the door and turned the ignition. She just got one. I sat in the driver's seat of my Ford F-150, the engine idling with a low, steady rumble that vibrated through the steering wheel and into my palms. I was ready to drive away, ready to head to the base. But Brooke knocked on my window. Her face was pale. She looked like she had just seen a ghost, or worse, a crime scene. I rolled down the window. What is it, Brooke? I shouldn't show you this, she said, hesitating, clutching her phone like it was a grenade. But you need to see exactly what you're up against. You need to see the narrative they are building while you sit here. She turned the screen toward me. It was a Facebook post from Judith. But it wasn't just text. It was a photo. A professionally staged black and white photo. It showed Tyler sitting in the leather armchair in Judith's library, holding a tumbler of scotch. He was staring out the window with a look of profound, tragic devastation. The lighting was perfect. He looked like a widower in a Victorian novel, not a man who had kicked his wife out into the snow 12 hours ago. I read the caption, and my breath hitched in my throat. A mother's heart breaks in silence. Please pray for my son, Tyler, today. He's trying to be strong, but the pain is visible. He is suffering the consequences of a partner who has chosen to abandon her vows and her home in the middle of our Lord's holiday. It is a tragedy when those trained to protect our country cannot find the heart to protect their own marriage. We are praying for Amari's safe return and for her heart to soften. Lakris Seed broken home. Prayer for Tyler. Soldier needs Jesus. The comments were already pouring in. He looks so crushed. Stay strong, Tyler. I always knew she was too rough for him. He deserves a gentle soul. Ungrateful, after everything that family did for her. I stared at the image. I looked at Tyler's face. I knew that look. It wasn't sadness. It was the face he made when he was hungover and waiting for Judith to bring him aspirin. They weren't just smearing my name. They were erasing my humanity. They were painting me as a monster who abandoned a grieving saint. Something inside me shifted. For the last 18 hours, I had felt a whirlwind of emotions. Shock, sadness, fear, confusion. I had felt like a victim. I had felt like a little girl lost in the woods. But as I looked at that photo, that calculated, manipulative piece of propaganda, the whirlwind stopped. The chaos in my mind settled into a flat, cold horizon. I handed the phone back to Brooke. My hand was steady, rock steady. Thank you, Brooke, I said. My voice sounded different, deeper, hollower. Amari? Brooke asked, leaning in. Are you okay? You look different. I'm fine, I said. Go home. I have work to do. I rolled up the window before she could argue. I was alone in the cab of my truck. The heater blasted warm air, but I felt cold. Not the shivering cold of the snow, but the cold of a weapon's barrel. I reached into the center console. Buried under a stack of old gas receipts and spare change was a small, worn book with a camouflage cover. My field Bible. I had carried it on 2 deployments. It had sand from Iraq still stuck in the binding. I opened it. I didn't need to search for the page. The spine was cracked open to the verse I'd read every night before convoy missions. Psalm 144:1. I ran my thumb over the thin paper, whispering the words aloud in the quiet cab. Blessed be the Lord my rock, who trains my hands for war and my fingers for battle. Who trains my hands for war. I looked up and caught my own reflection in the rearview mirror. For 5 years, I'd avoided looking at myself. I had avoided the mirror because I didn't recognize the woman looking back. The woman in the velvet dresses, the woman who apologized for existing, the woman who made herself small. But today, the woman in the mirror looked back. Her eyes were red-rimmed, yes. Her hair was messy. But the gaze was sharp. It was the 1,000-yard stare of a non-commissioned officer who had just assessed a threat and authorized the use of force. I wasn't a daughter-in-law anymore. I wasn't a wife. I wasn't a charity case. I was Staff Sergeant Amari Carter, United States Army. I managed logistics for a battalion. I was responsible for millions of dollars in equipment and the lives of soldiers. I didn't crumble under pressure. I ate pressure for breakfast. Judith and Tyler thought they were dealing with a broken woman. They thought they were dealing with a country bumpkin who would come crawling back for forgiveness because she had nowhere else to go. They had absolutely no idea who they had just declared war on. They want a villain, I said to the reflection in the mirror. Fine, I'll play the villain. I slammed my hand down on the steering wheel. The thud echoed through the cab, a sound of finality. But I won't play by their rules. I put the truck in gear. I didn't turn right toward the highway that led back to Judith's neighborhood. I didn't turn back toward the motel to hide. I turned left, toward Fort Belvoir. I wasn't going home to argue. I wasn't going to scream and cry and give them more content for their Facebook pity party. In the military, when you are attacked, you don't just return fire blindly. You escalate. You call in air support. You use superior firepower to overwhelm the enemy until they have no choice but to surrender. Tyler wanted to use the legal system to trap me. He wanted to use doctors to gaslight me. He forgot that I belonged to the most powerful organization on the planet. He forgot that the Uniform Code of Military Justice was a shield that his mother's money couldn't penetrate. I wasn't going to a therapist. I was going to the Judge Advocate General's office, the JAG. I was going to file a report that would make Judith's gossip look like a bedtime story. I was going to unleash a legal storm that would strip Tyler of every single benefit he thought he was entitled to. As I merged onto the highway, watching the speedometer climb, I felt a strange sense of peace. It was the peace of purpose, the peace of knowing exactly what the mission was. "Blessed be the Lord, my rock," I whispered again, feeling the engine roar beneath me. God trains my hands for war. And Tyler? Tyler had just handed me the ammunition. I drove toward the base gates, leaving the weeping wife behind in the snow. The soldier had taken command. I know that right now, listening to this, there are so many of you who have reached this exact moment. That moment when the tears stop, the sadness evaporates, and you realize you are done being a victim. If you have ever had that moment where you looked in the mirror and decided to fight back, I need you to show me right now. Hit that like button to stand with Amari. And in the comments, I want you to type one simple word. Enough. Tell the world that you are done being stepped on. I tapped the GPS screen. Destination: JAG Corps Legal Office. Estimated time of arrival: 20 minutes. Run, Tyler. Run while you still can. The fluorescent lights of the Judge Advocate General's office, the JAG, hummed with a frequency that usually gave people headaches. To me, it sounded like salvation. I sat in a stiff wooden chair across from Captain Richardson, a sharp-eyed legal officer with a high and tight haircut and zero tolerance for nonsense. On the desk between us lay the foundation of my life: my military service record, my earnings statement, and the threat text from Tyler. "Let me get this straight, Staff Sergeant," Captain Richardson said, leaning back and crossing his arms. "Your husband is threatening to have you declared mentally incompetent by his mother's private doctor?" "Yes, sir," I replied, my voice steady. "He believes that if he can prove I have severe PTSD, he can file for power of attorney or at least sway a divorce court to grant him control of our marital assets, specifically my future pension and my BAH. The captain let out a short, dry laugh. It wasn't a happy sound. "Virginia is an equitable distribution state, Carter. But military benefits? Those are federal. And attempting to weaponize a mental health diagnosis to seize control of a service member's finances? That borders on fraud. Especially if we can prove he's the one creating the hostile environment." He slid a notepad toward me. "He can't touch your disability. He can't touch your pension unless a court awards it as property, and no judge is going to give a dime to a man who kicked his wife out into the snow on Christmas Eve. You are the soldier here. You are the one protected by the Service Members Civil Relief Act in specific contexts. We're going to make sure he knows that." I felt a knot in my chest loosen. "So, I have the high ground?" "You have the high ground," he confirmed. "But you need ammunition. I need you to document everything, every dollar, every insult, every text message." "I'm on it, sir." I left his office and headed straight for the base library. I needed a computer, a printer, and a red pen. For the next 3 hours, I didn't think about my broken heart. I didn't think about the cold look in Judith's eyes. I became a forensic accountant. I logged into our joint bank account. I had always been too tired after work to look closely at the statements. I just made sure the bills were paid and trusted Tyler to handle the discretionary spending. Trust? It's a dangerous thing when placed in the wrong hands. I hit print on the last 24 months of statements. The printer churned out page after page, warm and heavy in my hands. I sat at a corner table and uncapped my red pen. First, I circled my deposits. the Army paycheck, the BAH, basic allowance for housing. It was consistent, reliable. Then I looked at the withdrawals. The red ink started to bleed across the page like a wound. Titleist TS3 driver, $549.99. Myrtle Beach Golf Resort, 1,200 $. Total wine and more, 340 $, a weekly. Porsche of Arlington, service depth for his project car, 800 $. Grohars. I stopped at one entry from last month. Tiffany & Co., 450 $. Force, I touched the paper. I hadn't received anything from Tiffany's. I hadn't received a birthday gift, an anniversary gift, or a Christmas gift in 3 years. I scrolled back to the date. November 14th. That was the week of his mother's birthday. He had used my hazard pay, money I earned while dodging mortar fire, to buy his mother a silver bracelet. And then he had come home and told me we couldn't afford to replace the bald tires on my truck. Unbelievable, I whispered. I did the math in the margins. Over the last 2 years, Tyler had spent 80% of our combined liquid income. My salary wasn't building our future. It was funding his cosplay of a wealthy aristocrat. He wasn't stuck with me, as he told his mother. He was dependent on me. I was his host organism. I organized the stack of papers. This wasn't just spending. Under the law, this was dissipation of marital assets. He was wasting our money on personal indulgences while I scrimped and saved. I opened a blank Word document. It was time to write the letter. But this wasn't going to be a tear-stained letter of resignation. I treated it like a DA Form 2823, a sworn statement. Subject: Incident Report. Financial irregularities and domestic displacement. I typed furiously, the keys clacking like machine gun fire in the quiet library. I listed the facts. Cold, hard, undeniable. Item 1. On 24 DEC at 2000 hours, Judith Sterling verbally assaulted me regarding my profession. Item 2. On 24 DEC at 2015 hours, Tyler Carter evicted me from the marital residence. Item 3. Review of financial records indicates unauthorized expenditure of $42,000 over 24 months on non-marital goods. Specifically, I attached the screenshots of the text messages where he threatened to force me into psychiatric care. I attached the photos of the bank statements with the red circles. I added the email addresses to the recipient line. 2. Tyler Carter. CC. Judith Sterling. CC. Reverend Thomas, Judith's pastor. CC. The entire Sterling family mailing list, which I had access to from planning the BBQ. I hovered the mouse over the send button. Not yet, I told myself. Strategic patience. If I sent it now, they would blow up my phone while I was still vulnerable. They would come to the base. They would try to intercept me. I needed to be a ghost when this bomb went off. I clicked Save to Drafts. I packed up my evidence, my receipts, literally and figuratively, and walked out of the library. My final stop was the company headquarters. First Sergeant Miller looked up from his desk when I walked in. He saw the look on my face. He didn't ask stupid questions. What do you need, Staff Sergeant? I need 48 hours of emergency leave, First Sergeant, I said. I have a domestic situation that requires relocation. I need to secure new quarters and move my gear. Miller nodded slowly. You need a truck? You need bodies? Negative, Top. I need to do this quietly. I need to extract my personal effects from a hostile environment without engaging the enemy. He signed the form without blinking. Granted. You go dark. If they call here looking for you, I haven't seen you. Watch your six, Carter. Hooah, First Sergeant. I walked back to my truck as the sun began to set behind the hangars. The base was calm. The flag was being lowered for the retreat ceremony, the bugle notes of "To the Colors" drifting across the cold air. I stopped and saluted the flag, feeling a lump in my throat. This was my family. This structure, this discipline, this code. This was where I belonged. Not at a dining table being told I was worthless. I climbed into my truck. I had my leave approved. I had my legal protection. I had the evidence that would destroy Tyler's reputation and his bank account. The plan was simple. Tomorrow morning, Tyler would leave for work at 800. Judith had her tennis lesson at 0900. The house would be empty. That was my window. I wasn't just going to leave, I was going to disappear. And when I was gone, I was going to drop the email that would burn their world to the ground. Operation Ghost Protocol was a go. H-hour was set for 09 p.m. tomorrow. 0900 hours. The target was on the move. I sat in my Ford F-150, parked 3 blocks away behind a cluster of oak trees, watching through binoculars. Judith's pristine white Lexus SUV backed out of the driveway, heading toward the country club for her Tuesday morning tennis lesson. Tyler had left an hour earlier in his Raptor, presumably to go sit in his cubicle and pretend to be a tycoon. The house was finally empty, and this was H-hour. I put the truck in gear and rolled slowly down the street. My heart wasn't racing with fear anymore. It was beating with the steady, heavy rhythm of a breaching charge about to detonate. I pulled into the driveway, leaving the engine running. I didn't care if the neighbors saw me. Let them look. They were about to get a show anyway. I walked up to the front door, the key feeling heavy in my hand. I unlocked it and stepped inside. The silence of the house was immediate and oppressive, smelling of expensive vanilla potpourri and deception. For years, walking into this foyer had made my stomach knot with anxiety, wondering what I had done wrong, what speck of dust Judith would find, what passive-aggressive comment Tyler would make. Today, I felt nothing but the urge to purge. I moved fast. I didn't run. Running attracts attention, but I moved with a purpose. I went straight to the master bedroom and dragged my old, olive-drab military duffel bag out from the back of the closet where Tyler had insisted I hide it. I unzipped it, the sound loud in the quiet room. I ignored the rack of clothes Judith had curated for me. The crushed velvet dresses, the pastel cardigans, the ridiculous high heels that pinched my toes hung there like costumes for a play I'd been forced to star in. I left them all. I didn't want a single thread of that life touching my skin ever again. I went to the bottom drawer and grabbed my OCP uniforms, my PT gear, my worn-in combat boots. I grabbed the few books on military history that Tyler had called boring and my survival knife. Then, I went to the guest room closet, found the shoebox, and opened the lid. There they were, my commendation medals, my achievement medals, the ribbons that represented years of my life, sand in my teeth, and friends lost. Judith had tossed them in here like they were junk jewelry. I gently wrapped them in a t-shirt and placed them in the safest pocket of my duffel bag. "Let's go, Gunner," I called out softly. From the laundry room, a golden head popped up. Gunner, our 6-year-old golden retriever, trotted out, his tail wagging uncertainly. He was the only living thing in this house that had ever shown me unconditional love, yet Tyler hated walking him because dog hair ruins the car upholstery. I clipped the leash onto his collar and whispered, "You're coming with me, buddy. We're done here." He seemed to understand, pressing his side against my leg without a bark. I hauled the heavy duffel bag over my shoulder. It weighed about 50 pounds, but it felt light as a feather. I had one last stop, the kitchen. I walked to the massive marble island, the centerpiece of Judith's pride, and reached into my pocket to pull out my wedding ring. It sparkled under the recessed lighting, a 2-carat diamond that I knew was high-grade cubic zirconia because I had found the receipt in his glove compartment 3 years ago. I placed the fake ring in the center of the counter. Then I reached into my other pocket and pulled out the challenge coin. Tyler kept it on his desk, claiming a 2-star general had palmed it to him for his civilian leadership, but it was a $15.99 eBay purchase. To a soldier, a challenge coin is sacred. Buying one is stolen valor, the ultimate insult. I placed the fake coin right next to the fake ring. The symbolism was perfect. A fake marriage, a fake honor, a fake life. "Checkmate," I whispered. I walked out the front door with Gunner at my heel. The cold air felt like freedom. I threw the duffel bag into the bed of the truck, helped Gunner into the passenger seat, and climbed in behind the wheel. But I didn't put the truck in drive yet. I pulled out my phone and opened the drafts folder. The email was there. The subject line, "Incident report, financial irregularities and domestic displacement." Attached were the bank statements showing the golf clubs, the liquor, the debt payments, the screenshots of the gaslighting texts, and the police report reference number I had just filed with the JAG. The recipient list was a work of art. Tyler, Judith, Reverend Thomas, the Sterling family reunion list, and the HOA board president. My thumb hovered over the send button. For a split second, I thought about the fallout. This wasn't just a breakup. This was a nuclear detonation. I pressed send. The little sent swoosh sound echoed in the cab. It was done. The missile was in the air. I put the truck in drive and peeled out of the driveway, the tires kicking up a spray of slush. I didn't look back to see the explosion. I knew exactly how the timeline would play out in my absence. As I drove toward the base, creating distance between the soldier and the battlefield, I played the scenario out in my head like a tactical simulation. I knew that in about 2 hours, Tyler would come home early, probably expecting to find me crying in the kitchen. Instead, he would walk into a tomb. I could imagine his voice echoing off the hardwood floors, leading him to the kitchen where he would find the ring and the coin, sitting on the cold marble. A final middle finger from the wife he underestimated. My visualization was confirmed precisely at 11:15 a.m. I was standing in line at the base housing office when my phone lit up. But it wasn't a text from Tyler. It was a notification from the bank app. Alert: joint account frozen due to suspicious activity investigation. And then, the silence broke. My phone started buzzing, not a vibration, but a continuous, frantic spasm. Ding, ding, ding. Messages from Tyler's cousins, messages from the church ladies, messages from Judith. I didn't look at them. I set the phone on the counter, watching the notifications stack up like body bags. Brooke called me 5 minutes later, sounding breathless. "Amari," she gasped. "I'm at the grocery store. Judith is in the produce aisle. She just checked her email on her phone. She just dropped a gallon of milk on the floor. It exploded everywhere. She's screaming at her phone in front of everyone." I leaned back against the counter, stroking Gunner's soft head as a rare, genuine smile spread across my face. "Target destroyed," I said softly. The tactical retreat was over. The counteroffensive had just landed a direct hit. I didn't stick around to watch my former life implode, but in a military town like Northern Virginia, news travels faster than a supersonic jet. And when that news involves a civilian trying to breach a federal military installation, it travels at the speed of light. According to the official military police report I received later, and the gleeful retelling by the young specialist manning the guard shack, Tyler arrived at the Tully Gate of Fort Belvoir exactly 45 minutes after finding the empty house. He wasn't driving calmly. He was speeding in his Ford Raptor, swerving between lanes, fueled by panic and rage. When he pulled up to the checkpoint, he didn't have his identification ready. Instead, he started screaming at the MP on duty, demanding to be let in to retrieve his stolen property. Now, there are 2 things you never do to a military police officer: you never touch them, and you never scream demands at them. Tyler, in his arrogance, did both. When the MP asked him to step out of the vehicle, Tyler apparently lunged for the door handle, shouting, "Do you know who I am? My wife is in there. She stole my dog." The result was swift, violent, and entirely predictable. Tyler didn't get to march into the base and drag me home. Instead, he found himself face down on the cold asphalt with a knee in his back and handcuffs ratcheting tight around his wrists. He was arrested for disturbing the peace on a federal installation and failure to obey a lawful order. His precious Ford Raptor was towed. The incident report noted that he was hysterical and uncooperative. It was the first time in his life that Tyler Carter faced a system he couldn't manipulate with his mother's money or a charming smile. The United States Army does not care about your country club membership. While Tyler was getting a crash course in federal law enforcement, Judith was facing a tribunal of a different kind. Sunday morning arrived with the usual pomp and circumstance at their affluent community church. Usually, Judith Sterling would walk into the narthex like she owned the building, greeting her prayer chain circle, with the benevolent air of a queen holding court. But this Sunday was different. My email had hit the inbox of every influential woman in that congregation on Tuesday. They had read the bank statements. They had seen the text messages, but most damning of all, they had read my detailed account of how Judith mocked my service, how she called a soldier useless and a mental case, because I didn't bake a pie to her standards. In Virginia, patriotism isn't just a sentiment, it's a social currency. Almost everyone in those pews had a father, a son, or a husband who served. Disrespecting the troops is the one sin that Southern hospitality does not cover. Brooke's mother, who attends the same service, told me later that when Judith walked in, the room didn't go silent. It went cold. Judith approached Mrs. Higgins, the head of the altar guild. Mrs. Higgins simply turned her back and began adjusting a flower arrangement. Judith tried to wave at the pastor's wife. The woman looked straight through her, as if she were made of glass. Then came the coup de grace. One of the older matriarchs of the church, a woman whose grandson was a Marine, walked right up to Judith in the middle of the aisle. She didn't shout. She leaned in and whispered loud enough for the surrounding pews to hear. "Judith, honey, we saw the email. You might want to pray for your own soul before you worry about anyone else's. We don't take kindly to people who spit on the flag in this house." Judith turned a shade of pale that matched the church walls. She didn't stay for the sermon. She turned on her heel and walked out, humiliated in the sanctuary she had ruled for decades. She had tried to use the church to destroy me, but the shrapnel had blown back right in her face. The final act of this tragedy played out 3 months later in a sterile conference room at a lawyer's office in Arlington. It was time to sign the divorce papers. Tyler was already there when I walked in with my JAG-appointed legal counsel. He looked terrible. He had lost weight, but not in a healthy way. His hair was unkempt, and the arrogance that used to define his posture was gone, replaced by a nervous twitch in his leg. He didn't look at me. He looked at the stack of documents on the mahogany table. My lawyer, Captain Richardson, had made it very clear to Tyler's attorney. We had enough evidence of financial dissipation and attempted fraud to tie Tyler up in court for years. We could go after him for every penny of the BAH he had squandered. We could expose his spending habits to his employer, or he could sign an uncontested divorce decree. The deal was simple. I kept my pension, I kept my dog, I kept every cent of my future earnings. He kept his debts, his leased truck, and his mother. "Just sign it, Tyler," his lawyer whispered, sounding exhausted. "It's the best deal you're going to get." Tyler picked up the pen. His hand shook. For a second, I thought he might try to speak to me, might try to gaslight me one last time with a "I still love you" or "We can fix this." But he looked at the thick file folder sitting next to my elbow, the file labeled Evidence, Financial Records. He knew what was in there. He knew I held the nuclear codes to his reputation. He signed, scratch, scratch, scratch. He pushed the papers across the table without a word. "We're done here," Captain Richardson said, gathering the documents efficiently. I stood up. I looked at the man I had vowed to spend my life with. I searched inside myself for some feeling, anger, sadness, maybe even a little pity. But there was nothing. It was like looking at a stranger in a grocery store line. He was just a man. A small, sad, greedy man who had mistaken kindness for weakness. "Goodbye, Tyler," I said. My voice was calm, level. He didn't answer. He just stared at the table. I walked out of the office building and stepped onto the sidewalk. The spring air was crisp. The cherry blossoms in DC were just starting to bloom, painting the city in strokes of pink and white. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs until they stretched against my ribs. In the Army, we do these things called ruck marches. You strap a 50-pound pack to your back and march for 12, 15, sometimes 20 miles. The weight grinds into your shoulders. Your hips bruise, your feet blister. You get used to the pain. It becomes a constant, dull background noise to your existence. But the moment you finish, the moment you unclip that waist belt and let the pack drop to the ground, there is a sensation that is impossible to describe to someone who hasn't felt it. It isn't just relief. It feels like you are floating. You feel light. You feel like gravity has lost its hold on you. Standing there on the sidewalk, watching the traffic flow by, I felt exactly like that. The 50-pound rucksack of Judith's criticism was gone. The heavy weight of Tyler's financial parasitism was gone. The constant grinding pressure to be someone I wasn't had simply vanished. I wasn't happy. Happiness would take time to rebuild. But I was light. I walked to my truck, where Gunnar was waiting in the passenger seat, his nose pressed against the window. I unlocked the door and climbed in. "Ready to go home, buddy?" I asked him. Home wasn't a mansion. It wasn't a place filled with expensive furniture. Home was a small apartment near the base. Home was my uniform hanging in the closet. Home was the peace of mind that came from knowing that every dollar in my pocket, every medal on my wall, and every decision I made belonged to me. I put the truck in gear and merged into traffic. The rearview mirror was clear. No one was chasing me. The enemy had been neutralized. The battlefield was cleared. And for the first time in a long time, the road ahead was wide open. "Attention to orders!" The voice of the battalion commander boomed across the parade field, cutting through the crisp Virginia air. I stood at the position of attention, my spine straight as a steel rod, my chin parallel to the ground. But this time, my heart wasn't racing with anxiety. It was swelling with a quiet, undeniable pride. The Secretary of the Army has reposed special trust and confidence in the patriotism, valor, fidelity, and professional excellence of Staff Sergeant Amari Carter. I felt the new rank patch being slapped onto the Velcro of my chest. The 3 chevrons and 2 rockers of a Sergeant First Class, E7, Senior Non-Commissioned Officer. 1 year ago, I had been standing in the snow, shivering in a velvet dress, believing I was worthless. Today, I was standing in the sun, recognized as a leader of soldiers. But the promotion wasn't the only victory. Later that afternoon, I drove my truck, now fully paid off, to a quiet street in Alexandria. I pulled into the driveway of a small 1950s brick bungalow. It wasn't a mansion. It didn't have marble countertops or a 2-story foyer. It had a slightly creaky porch and a yard that needed weeding. But the deed had my name on it, just my name. Gunnar hopped out of the truck and immediately began rolling in the grass, happy to be home. I sat on the porch steps, watching him, realizing that this peace was what I had been fighting for all along. I didn't need a castle. I just needed a fortress where I was safe to be myself. And as it turned out, being myself was exactly what attracted the right kind of attention. I met Jonathan 6 months ago at a Vets in Tech networking mixer in DC. I almost didn't go. I was still gun-shy, still convinced that men only saw me as a paycheck or a project to be fixed. But Brooke dragged me out, promising free appetizers. Jonathan was standing by the bar, wearing a polo shirt that couldn't quite hide the build of a former Marine. He was an engineer now, designing bridges. But he still stood with that distinct devil dog posture. When we were introduced, I instinctively tried to hide my hands. I was ashamed of the calluses, the small scars from range days, the roughness that Tyler had always hated. Jonathan reached out and took my hand firmly. He didn't flinch. He didn't pull away. He ran his thumb over the rough patch on my palm, the exact spot where Tyler used to make a face of disgust. "Machine gunner?" he asked, a knowing smile crinkling the corners of his eyes. "Logistics," I corrected him, feeling a blush rise. "But I spend a lot of time moving crates." "That's a working hand," Jonathan said, looking me right in the eye. "That's the hand of someone who builds things and protects things. It's beautiful." He didn't try to change me. He didn't ask about my bee. He asked about my service. He asked about my dog. And when I told him about the night in the snow, he didn't pity me. He looked furious on my behalf, and then he told me I was the bravest woman he'd ever met. Which brings us to tonight. The sun is setting behind the oak trees in my backyard, casting a warm golden glow over the scene. The air smells like hickory smoke and slow-cooked brisket. This isn't a catered affair with tiny, tasteless hors d'oeuvres. This is a celebration. String lights are draped between the trees, twinkling like fireflies. A local craft brewery has set up a tap station in the corner, pouring cold IPAs and stouts into mason jars. Laughter, loud, genuine, belly-shaking laughter, fills the air. There is no seating chart. There is no dress code. Brooke is manning the smoker, arguing playfully with Sergeant Miller about the proper way to slice ribs. I am inside the house, looking in the mirror. I am wearing a wedding dress. It's white lace, simple and elegant, hitting just below the knee. It fits me perfectly, not because I starved myself to fit into it, but because I bought it for the body I have, strong shoulders and all. You ready, Sarge? Brooke calls out from the hallway. 1 second, I reply. I sit on the edge of the bed and reach for the final piece of my ensemble. I don't reach for glass slippers. I don't reach for strappy heels that make my feet bleed. I reach for a pair of black leather combat boots. But not just any boots. These are Corcorans, spit shine to a mirror finish, the kind you wear with your dress blues. I lace them up tight, left over right. The familiar ritual calms my nerves. I stand up and stomp my heel. The sound is solid, grounded. I walk out the back door. The screen door creaks, and the chatter in the yard dies down. Jonathan is standing under the old oak tree. He's wearing a nice suit, but he's ditched the tie, and he's holding 2 cold beers. When he sees me, his face lights up. He doesn't look at the dress first. He looks at my boots. He throws his head back and laughs, a sound of pure delight. He lifts his beer in a toast. Semper Fi, baby, he mouths to me. Hoo-ah, I whisper back. I walk across the grass. My boots are steady on the earth. I don't wobble. I don't falter. I walk toward the man who loves the soldier just as much as he loves the woman. We exchange vows right there in front of the smoker, with Gunnar sitting between us, chewing on a fallen rib bone. We don't promise to be perfect. We promise to have each other's six. We promise that no one gets left behind. As the party goes into the night, I take a moment to step back. I lean against the fence, sipping a cold lager, watching the people I love. I think about the woman who drove away from that mansion a year ago. I think about the fear, the uncertainty, the feeling that my life was over. I reach into my pocket, not to check a text from a controlling husband, but to touch the small pocket Bible I still carry. Blessed be the Lord my rock, who trains my hands for war. He trained my hands for war so that I could fight my way to this peace. I look directly at you now. Yes, you. The one listening to this story in your car, or your kitchen, or maybe in the dark of your bedroom while everyone else is asleep. I know you. I know that feeling of walking on eggshells. I know the exhaustion of trying to be enough for people who are committed to misunderstanding you. They tell us that love means sacrifice, and that's true. But they forget to tell us that you should never sacrifice your self-respect on the altar of someone else's ego. In the Army, we are taught that retreat is not failure. Sometimes, a tactical retreat is the only way to save your life. It's the only way to regroup, rearm, and come back stronger. I didn't lose my marriage that Christmas Eve. I survived it. And if you are in that trench right now, listening to the mortar fire of criticism and control, I want you to know something. You can walk away. You can pack your bag. You can lace up your boots and march toward a life where you are celebrated, not just tolerated. The victory isn't in changing them. The victory is in saving yourself. I take one last look at my husband, laughing with my friends under the string lights. I smile, turn off the lights in my head, and whisper the final status report. Mission accomplished. Looking back, the most critical lesson I learned wasn't about how to defeat Tyler or Judith. It was about defeating the voice in my own head that whispered, I deserved their cruelty. We often stay in toxic situations because we mistake endurance for love or silence for peace. But I realize that you cannot heal in the same environment that made you sick. True strength isn't just about how much pain you can carry. It's knowing when to set the load down. Your self-respect is a territory worth defending. Never apologize for establishing a boundary that protects your soul. That isn't selfishness. It is necessary survival. This was just one battle in the long war of life. And I know many of you are fighting your own silent battles right now. If my story gave you even a spark of courage today, please hit that like button. It helps this message reach other soldiers in the trenches who need to hear it. And I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to execute a tactical retreat to save yourself? Share your victory in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a briefing. Until next time, stay strong and hold the line.